Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. You know, even if I could, I'd still prefer surrogacy. Businesslike, the beautiful brown-haired woman with smooth porcelain skin said. Her neat fingers were perfectly manicured. Her hair was arranged in an elegant hairstyle. Robert had never seen her disheveled. Emily grew up as a child in the home of wealthy parents. She was good at school, knew French, and knew how to present herself. She was intelligent and had excellent manners. Such a girl simply could not help but like her. When they first met, Robert was in love with his classmate. It was a teenage romance, very emotional and unstable. Robert's parents were wealthy and well-connected people, and his first love did not meet their high standards. Of course, they did not forbid their son to see her and treated her kindly. But outside the girl's presence, they frankly said that she was not a match for Robert. He did not listen. However, the parents didn't have to do anything. Like most couples, they broke up on their own. And that's when Emily came into Robert's life. He felt badly about the breakup with his first love, getting drunk. At one serious event, where Robert's family arrived in full, Emily's family was there too. The girl was beautiful and taciturn. She didn't like the hustle and bustle. By the middle of the evening, Robert managed to steal a bottle of expensive wine from the table, and he went out to the balcony to discreetly drink. "Maybe bring you a glass," Emily suggested. Robert turned around frightened. "I thought it was an adult." Robert was 16 at the time. Of course, drinking in his family came back, especially in public. High society was not supposed to know that the Crawford family had any problems. "Well, I'm 18. You can think of me as an adult, and you don't seem to be allowed alcohol yet. And that's juice," lied to Robert. And what caused this passion for grape juice? By the way, the juice is French. I hear it's a good year. Elite alcohol. Robert grimaced. "It's just a regular booze. Frankly, beer tastes better." He didn't get frank, snooty little lady he knew. "Oh, I wouldn't mind a beer," she said with a smile. "Are you serious?" The socialite young lady likes a beer with her fish, so she's not too Parisushino with that delicious, greasy juice. "I mean, that's fantastic." Robert was surprised. Was it imaginable that these manicured fingers could clean fish? How about a runaway then? "I know where they sell good beer in Roche." The girl walked up to him, looked into his eyes, and sighed. "Be sure to call me when you turn 18, buddy." She went into the hall, and Robert felt something tingle inside. He decided he was going to win her over and have a beer with her. It was a matter of self-respect, a matter of his male ego. Emily proved to be very unapproachable. She had no friends and no girlfriends. She was Daddy's little girl and did her best to make her beloved father proud. In fact, he was. He boasted of her successes. She was only interested in her studies, taking care of herself. So did her mother, who owned several beauty salons in town. They had a beer when Robert turned 17. It took almost a year to win her favor, to prove that he wasn't just a kid, but a grown, serious man. Emily's parents liked Robert. After all, he was from a good family. But Emily herself didn't pay attention to him for a long time because he was 2 years younger than her. When they started dating, there was a problem. Emily had a disease. It was a rare disease. No one in her family had it. It took her several years to be examined. The doctors couldn't figure out what was going on with the young girl. For a long time, they tried to write it off as just hypochondria. But the tests kept getting worse and worse. Emily's father got tired of hearing from his daughter. They couldn't get a diagnosis. He took her to Europe. Even there, however, the doctors merely threw up their hands. It was only an experienced American doctor, to whom Emily came without hope, who diagnosed her illness. By that time, Robert was already rich enough. He had made a fortune and would have given anything for Emily. But the doctors all said there was no cure. It's possible to live with it, but there's no guarantee of prognosis. Everything depended on the mood, on the body's peculiarities. Emily knew about the disease and accepted this news, quietly went on living, took medications, went to the doctor once every 6 months. "I want a baby with you," Robert said. He couldn't react as calmly to the situation. The man began to have trouble with his nerves because of his wife's illness. Emily's parents worried wildly and saw that Robert was beginning to get sick with worry too. They were very appreciative of the way he treated their daughter and how he cared for her. The relationship between Emily and Robert soured. She knew she was not allowed to have a child. The only option was surrogacy. Robert begged her to agree, but her wife refused. There was a scandal on this ground. Emily almost filed for divorce. She gave her consent, and Robert found a girl through an advertisement. When Jenna showed up on the doorstep of their house for the first time, Emily only lifted her lips. "So you're going to have my baby?" she asked. The girl nodded embarrassedly. She was very young, very beautiful. Why did she have to do this? For the money, of course, but not many people dared to do it. Emily and Robert decided not to ask unnecessary questions. The procedure was a success. It all worked out the first time. Even in those days, every attempt to implant an embryo cost a lot of money. Robert was willing to pay for any number of attempts. The doctors warned that several procedures might be necessary. But everything worked out right away. During her pregnancy, Robert visited Jenna, asking how she was doing. He took her to the doctors himself. Emily wasn't interested, as if she didn't care. She was distant. She seemed to be worried very deeply inside. Robert told her about the baby, and she just nodded and moved the conversation along. He placed that the tiny apartment where Jenna lived was always clean and tidy with her mother living with her, but Robert never saw her. Apparently, the woman was at work when he visited, being alone with her. Robert was kicking himself for his own emotions. His heart began to beat faster. He stuttered and blushed and felt like a schoolboy. Actually, Jenna was also modest, quiet. She lowered her eyes bashfully when it came to personal things. For instance, she was embarrassed when Robert asked to touch her belly. He was terribly anxious to touch and feel his baby's movement. "Jenna, surely the pregnancy was proceeding normally?" he asked. Robert was seriously worried and did not skimp on any treatments. However, after several visits to the expensive fee-paying hospital, Jenna checked in at her clinic, where all the doctors were familiar to her. She saw that Robert was paying a lot for appointments, and she was very uncomfortable. The girl had grown up in poverty and was used to saving money on everything. She was frankly embarrassed that she was being charged such insane amounts of money, especially when you consider that free clinics can do the same thing. 1 million people give birth. Yep, here you are gold and requires special treatment. Jenna was the kind of girl who never complains or asks for help. She grew up with her mother and knew from a young age they could rely on each other and no one else. Robert remembered well the day everything changed. He drove home from work, parked the car in the garage, and walked into Emily's house. "I'm home." There was no answer for him. It was too quiet when he left for work. Emily was still asleep, and he tried not to wake her up and walked into the room and saw that Emily was still in bed. He walked over, gently, touching her shoulder. It was cold. From there, it was all a blur. Robert realized what had happened, but he couldn't pull himself together. He was hysterical. He called the doctors and took a long time to explain exactly what had happened. His lips were trembling. His hands could barely hit the phone buttons. She was dead. "My dead wife's house is cold all over and hard. Come, please." Robert remembered asking the doctors to resuscitate her dove. "She died yesterday." The elderly man in the white coat sighed. It turned out that the disease had progressed and her heart failed. Emily just fell asleep and never woke up. It's hard to describe what happened in the days that followed. Her parents were heartbroken. Robert was in an even worse state. Even his mother asked him not to kill himself. So much thinking about his health is hard for all of us. But pull yourself together. If Emily sees you now, it hurts for her, mother of the deceased said. Robert sobbed. He was shaking so much that even the pills didn't help. When the coffin was brought in and he saw her, he fainted. He walked up to her, took her hand, said something, and then collapsed without feeling. He was not at the funeral because he came to consciousness 24 hours later. Doctors diagnosed him with severe nervous exhaustion. He did not notice how he stopped eating. All his energy was used to keep smiling, to pretend everything was okay. Doctors kept him in the hospital for 3 weeks, putting him on drips and giving him serious medications. Robert returned to his apartment and realized he could no longer be there. He didn't take anything from there, just went out as he was and came to his parents' doorstep. Another week passed, and Robert saw Jenna on the phone. "Good afternoon. Your son was born today at 800 am. Congratulations to you. I would be happy to close our deal with you and give the baby to you and Emily," Jenna said. Robert sighed. "Emily, no." A bewilderment hung on the other end. "She's away." "That's all right. I'll stay with him as long as it takes until she arrives. Don't you get it? Emily died almost a month ago, so I didn't call you. I'm so sorry. I was at the hospital." Jenna was embarrassed to ask about what had happened. She thought it must have been an accident. Since Robert ended up in the hospital, "I'll come right over." "Where are you located?" he asked. Robert took his son in his arms and smiled. He had Emily's eyes. The lost meaning of life was found in that very moment. It was another event that again divided Robert's life into before and after. He paid Jenna, picked up his baby, and walked out of the maternity hospital not at all the person he went in. "We're going home. You're going to live there." "So am I. I don't have to take you to your parents," said Robert to the baby. He was given special mixes by the staff at the maternity hospital, instructions on where to buy them. He was told about the finer points of caring for babies. Of course, his mother helped him at first. She moved in with him and taught him how to take care of the baby. And then Robert left everything and completely took over the care of his young son. Fortunately, his financial situation allowed him to withdraw from business for a while. In choosing a name, Robert did not rely on his own tastes. He and Emily never talked about it. Apparently, she felt she would not hold her child in her arms. Only now did Robert understand why she was reluctant to go through with the procedure. At the same time, he didn't understand if she really didn't care. He was bored. He chastised himself. He was grieving. He was mixed up with many feelings, and it was hard to separate the one from the other. Robert chose the name Emil, but his wife's mother was against it. Let the boy have a different fate. We were told that the disease could be hereditary. He took the child in his arms. It's different. Let it be Max. Over the years, this decision grew stronger. Robert became convinced that his son was nothing like Emily. Yes, there were features of a woman in his face, but otherwise he looked more like him. He had a wide palm. His gaze was exactly the same as Robert's mother's, heavy and dark. He inherited a lot from his grandmother's, including the skill of persuasion that Robert's mother possessed. And if little Max wanted something, he knew how to make it happen. Robert himself sometimes wondered how he could do it. As the years passed, meetings with his son became less and less frequent. Robert moved from the city to the country. Max was severely allergic to many foods and things, and doctors advised the young father to take the child as far away from the noisy city as possible. He was only 2 years old when Robert sold the city house, stored masses of heavy memories, and moved to the suburbs. There was clean air, there was a school and a kindergarten. It was a village only without cows or sheep. The majors who could afford such a lifestyle lived there. The infrastructure was properly organized, and at the entrance to the village every car was inspected by a local security guard. Max grew up disobedient and willful. Even in those rare moments when Robert was with his son, they didn't get along. Robert understood his child had his own opinion on everything, but he couldn't accept something that wasn't an authority for him. "I want to go to Grandma's," he said. Robert had already planned a weekend at home, but had to start the car and drive to Emily's mom's house. The 3-year-old boy with his wife's eyes twisted him around as much as he could. Over time, Robert became distant from his son. He began to let him do whatever the boy wanted, and he himself fell into his work. Robert very rarely spent time with his son, or you weren't particularly eager to see your father. When Max was 6 years old, all of his grandparents were dead. The boy became interested in astronomy, reading books about the stars and looking through a telescope at night. It was his passion, his hobby. One day, Max ran away from home and found himself in the woods. He walked for a long time before he realized he was finally lost. Realized he wasn't. Wendy Green would find him anyway, but he decided not to wait by the weather and went where he thought he had come from. The road was winding. The sun was setting. Suddenly, a rustle was heard behind him. Max leaned over, thinking it was some kind of animal. In a second, however, he saw a boy in front of him. The boy was his height and his age. He had deep blue eyes, a bee, and a look of surprise and disdain. "Hi, and I was afraid. I thought it was a wolf," said Max. "Des Napier wolves. How stupid are you? It's just me. What's your name?" "My name is Max." The stranger took a step with his nose and, creaking the branches, came closer. "And I'm Alex." He held out his hand, and Max shook it. "Let's get acquainted. How long have you known this forest?" "I think I got a little lost." "Let's go." Only a child could get lost here. They came out of the woods together. Alex told them that he lived nearby. When Max got to the boy's house, it turned out to be a tent built from twigs. "So how do you sleep?" "It's cold here and it's raining and windy. I have a blanket and it hasn't rained yet. If I get cold or very hungry, I go back to the orphanage." "You're from there too, or are you from around here?" Alex sat down in his makeshift tent and crossed his legs. "I'm from around here. Yeah, we moved here a while ago. Let's go to my place. Dad won't be here today. And my babysitter's old. She's not interested in anything. All day long she reads and watches TV. You can swim at my place and sleep in the warmth. I'll show you a movie. And if someone sees me," Alex asked fearfully. "No, they won't. You'll sit under my bed. We'll put a blanket on it and you'll be warm. And it's still better than the cold and the branches in the woods. Let's go." Alex was hesitant. He looked incredulously toward the well-groomed Max. Alex's hair was in dire need of a good haircut. He was shot up and grimy. His clothes were old and crumpled. Apparently, he had lived alone for a long time. "Okay, but if anything, I'll run away. And you can help me and don't stop me and tell me I'm better off at the shelter, because that's not the way it goes." The boys shaved quietly toward the village. Alex told Max how hard life was for orphans. He didn't know his parents. Grew up with the rest of the boys, except that they became cruel and mean. Often they bullied the teachers. It was hard for Alex to stand it. He warned the teachers and the boys beat him for it. He began to run away a year ago, but back then he did not know how to get his own food. He ran away in the winter, not realizing he wouldn't survive. Now he knew where to steal food, where to get blankets, how to make a fire, and how to catch fish. He knew how to clean it for his 6 years, even. Max was amazed at how much older his friend was than he was. And yet they were the same age. "I'm actually an orphan too," Max said. "I don't have a mother. I've never seen her." "Congratulations." Indifferently, Alex said as he made his way through the branches. Of course, this orphanhood of theirs couldn't be compared. Max had grown up with a rich father who loved him, and though rarely spent time with him. Max came home as if nothing had happened. Didn't look at him, letting his glasses down a bit. It was an exact woman in her 60s with crumpled gray hair at the top of her head. With her thick fingers, she held a book. She could read for hours, sometimes aloud. Except Max wasn't interested in romance novels and detectives, and fairy tales Wendy Green did not like to read. They were of no interest to her. "Are you there? Wash your hands. Is porridge on the table waiting for you?" she said. His father didn't encourage eating in front of the TV, but Wendy Green knew that if she let the boy eat in his room while he watched cartoons, he wouldn't have to sit with him. She often brought food right into his room, and he was glad he did, because he wasn't much of a babysitter either. If he was with her for more than 10 minutes, she would invariably start telling him about her childhood. Max would tell his father that he played all day with Nanny, that they ate together in the kitchen and did household chores together. And Nanny would smile broadly with her sly Mona Lisa smile and say what a beautiful child Robert had. Any parent becomes unarmed if he praises his child. So the nanny worked for them for the 3rd year, and the 3rd year he learned to lie to his father and not to interfere with the nanny, to mind his own business. There were boys in their village, but they were all a little older or a little younger. There were no peers. The older ones hurt Max, and he stopped going near them, and he did not like to play with the kids. Therefore, when he saw Alex, he grabbed him with his claws and dragged him to his place. He felt a kinship with him, as if he took him for his own. They were the same height. They thought alike, and at 6 years old they were both terribly lonely. Max went up to the 2nd floor, to his room, closed the door, and opened the window. Alex immediately walked up the stairs to him. He boldly climbed over the windowsill and was inside. "First, we have to get you into the shower. Let's go. I have my own in there and a washing machine. My dad taught me how to do my own laundry. Specially bought me a separate one so I could be on my own." Alex sighed. "And I've been doing my own laundry by hand since I was 3. Max became uncomfortable again. Alex had been bathing in the tub for half an hour, and there was no way he could have been in the warm water. Max sat there behind a curtain in the bathtub, waiting for his friend. Alex told him about the orphanage and the boys there and enjoyed inhaling the smell of expensive baby shampoo. He also told him not to peep. Apparently, he was very shy. In fact, Max wasn't going to. He sat quietly with his back to the bathroom and chatted with him. Suddenly, footsteps were heard. There was a knock on the door. "Are you there?" Nania asked. Every hour she came to check on the baby, even though she didn't particularly like climbing the steps. "Yes, I'm bathing. Don't come in, please." Frightened Max gave out. Alex fell silent. "Oh, how grown up we have become. Why haven't we seen you?" Nanny laughed, and she went back. She told him to wipe the floor behind him and to wash the tub. Max gave Alex his clothes, dressed him completely. His socks could only be thrown away, but the rest was supposed to be in the machine, including the shoes. "Surely the babysitter won't burn?" the little guest asked with rapt attention. "Just do not be afraid of porridge from a plate." "And what will you eat?" asked Alex. "Don't worry, I'm not hungry. There's always food and sandwiches in the fridge. We won't get lost." "How easy must it be to live like you? Do you have everything?" "Max, it's getting really frustrating. Don't you think I'm just a cheese and butter here? I barely see my father. I don't know my mother. Have you seen the babysitter yourself? She's not my friend. Just making sure I don't get in trouble. I'm all alone here. But I have another problem at the orphanage. There's so many kids there, and they're all different. One is bawling, one is fighting, one is stealing. The older ones bully. You have to be afraid of them. The younger ones, you have to protect them. You have to watch them. Teachers are like your nanny. They just make sure that by the end of the day no one comes. The food there is quite bearable, except that there are guys who make me run away all the time. They bully me. They beat me. They make me do humiliating things. And they get away with it. Where do I put them? It's too early to go to a children's prison. The teachers themselves are afraid of some of them. And the older kids are better behaved than this gang. They're 11 years old. They're already acting like criminals. Why don't you get together and beat them up? There are more of you normal kids, aren't there?" Max asked. "Because we do not withstand the competition." "Businesslike," reasoned Alex. "They can pull a fork and stab you in the leg or in the throat. It had happened before. Well, at least that guy didn't die." They can do anything we can't. That's not who we are. Everybody's afraid of them. And I'm avoiding the, business, too. Stay with me. Maybe I'll talk to my dad, and he'll adopt you." Max glowered. Alex shook his head. "Well, I haven't told you everything. I wasn't really born in an orphanage. I got there about 3 years ago. I have a mom, except she doesn't come to see me at all. Guys, they tell me she's dead. I don't believe that. I looked for her, but I couldn't find her. When you ran away from the orphanage when you were 6, you can't just go to the police and say you're looking for your mom. They'll take you to her and bring you back," Alex said. "And you don't want to be adopted because you're waiting for your mom to pick you up, right?" The boy sighed and went silent. Alex knew he was causing pity, but he hated being pitied. He didn't want to be pitied, and Max felt it subconsciously and tried not to pity him. He changed the subject of conversation. Then they turned on cartoons. By the time the babysitter came into his bedroom, Alex was already nestled comfortably under the bed. He just lurched and stayed still. "That won't do. Buddy, I'm not old enough to be shoveling your socks out from under the bed," Wendy Green said menacingly. Hearing about the socks under the bed, Max freaked out. If he went under there, Alex would be exposed, of course. "And that's why I'll clean it up myself. I promise. Give me 10 minutes, and a room will be perfect. And no socks under the bed." The babysitter smiled when she heard the pioneer word. She clocked in and left. She was gone for half an hour. During that time, Alex helped Max put Max in perfect order. "What's that? Is that how you have your stuff stacked? Or is it just lying around on the table?" "Not accustomed to order. But it's ok. As they said our steps, it's fixable. Businesslike," Alex said, folding things like in the army, perfectly straight, when she didn't come to check. Alex had already managed to get under the bed. She glanced around the room, looked at the folded things, at the put-away toys. "Were there fairies coming to see you? Or did you call the cleaning service?" she asked. "Did you?" "No, I was just learning from you." Again, I found something to answer Max. The nanny was satisfied. Soon Robert arrived and let her go home. She lived next door and rode her bicycle home. When Max got on it, it always seemed like its wheels were about to bend. But it didn't. The father walked into his son's room and sank tiredly on the bed, bringing the springs close to Alex's face. "So how was your day?" Robert asked. There was gray hair on his temples. It could be hereditary or due to a lot of stress. Robert had both in his biography. "That's great. I walked, I cleaned, I lived life to the fullest, Dad," Max said. "That's great. Don't forget to read. You have school this year. Spring is almost over. Summer will fly by, too, and you'll be a schoolboy." Max nodded, and Dad left. "You can get out now," Max said. Alex climbed out from under the bed. "Doesn't he come over to say goodnight to you anymore?" "Like what?" "No, we see each other in the morning. A few minutes before he leaves and 5 minutes in the evening before he drinks his beer and goes to bed. He's a drinker." "No, he seems to drink in the evening to get a better night's sleep. Goes to work in the morning. They say most adults do that. Anyway, I've never seen him drunk," Max said. "That's a good dad you got there. Only he must work hard to have such a nice house in the country, and a babysitter, and a bike, and a TV in Porridge." The boy sighed. "I get so mad at him sometimes. I want to talk to him, to share, and he's always busy all the time. At this job, he says I'll grow up, and I'll understand everything. What is there to understand? When I grow up, I won't have to talk to him anymore. I'll have friends, a wife, kids." Alex sighed. "And I'd give a lot to have a father like you, except I don't have one, and I never have. So appreciate him, and don't go crazy with the fat, or else so what? He's a wimp. He doesn't get enough attention." Alex gave it away. Max was offended by his words, but at the same time he felt ashamed. After all, If you look at it from the point of view of the orphans, he was right. The next day, when Max's father left, Alex began to pack. "Where are you going?" Max was surprised. "Home." Alex answered, "Home. To those branches, whether there is enough food from the place. It is also warm here." "No, I can't live here. It's not fair. My things are dry, and I'll wait for you there. And you come if you want to." Max got sad. He talked Alex out of it, but he left anyway. He got out the window, went down the fire escape, and ran away. Well, Max sighed. He stayed home until noon, and then he asked her out for a walk and came to the impromptu. "Gone, Alex." He was sitting there. "I brought you something to eat. Take it." Max handed him the sandwiches, and Alex was very happy. "Have you eaten?" he asked thoughtfully for me. "Don't worry, I always have food," Max answered. "Don't worry about me either. Thanks for the sandwiches. You know what I was thinking? Maybe we'll make a tree house with you. You're scary to come to. If your babysitter had peeked in the bathroom yesterday, or your dad had noticed my foot under the bed, I'd be in a shelter by now. They're looking for me. Let's make a cabin, and I'll live there. It's got to have a roof and walls. We can do that with you. I don't know. We could make a roof out of cloth. I've got one in my yard from an old shed. The old owners forgot it. My dad wanted to put it in the trash. Let's go get it and split it up into branches. Then you won't be afraid of the rain. And the wind, it is very big and sturdy. We'll fix it so it won't be blown away by the wind, and we'll make a floor out of boards, just not heavy ones. You'll have to work hard to lift them and tie them to the tree. You can do that with nails, can't you?" The boys found a suitable tree and dragged a bunch of stuff from the shed that was under the ice of Max's house. All kinds of old junk was stored there. Building the treehouse took the boys a few days. It wasn't until a week later that it was finished. The boards on the thick, low branches lay unevenly wobbly, but they didn't fall over. Under the weight of the boys, it was quite possible to sleep there, to sit. Max brought a homemade rug, and the bed at Alex's firmly protected it from the wind and rain. It wasn't a cabin, but rather a tent in a tree. There was barely enough room for one, but they still fit the two of them on sturdy planks that they barely managed to drag in. For almost a month, Max resorted to Alex. They climbed into the treehouse and chatted for hours, playing board games, of which Max had plenty. Only there was no one to play with. They became real friends. May has come. The weather was warm. Alex no longer ventured out and came to Max's house. Only once, in a severe thunderstorm, when he was afraid to be alone in the woods, he came to his house, climbed up the stairs, and quietly knocked on the glass. Max was already in bed, getting in sooner. Max got the kid down, and he was inside. I was soaking wet, but the weather also decided that you would be scared alone, and you came to support you at night. Alex came out. "I can't confess to a friend that he is afraid of thunderstorms. Take my shirt and shorts." Max held out his clothes to his friend. "All right. Just come back," and without turning around, said Alex. "Come on. We're just guys. Why are you shy?" "I'm not shy. Just don't look. That's all." Alex insisted. "You're shy. Although I'm getting shy when Wendy Green gives me a bath too. I guess we're growing up." Max sighed, standing with his back to his friend. "It's just that we're used to it in the orphanage. No need to stare at each other. You can get punished for that here," he explained as he put on his dry clothes. Alex habitually climbed under the bed. Max was on the bed. He was embarrassed that Alex had to sleep down there on the hard floor. It was only comforting that there was a fluffy white palace in the bedroom. At times, Max himself fell asleep on it to cartoons. Early in the morning, Max woke Alex up. "I'm off. I don't want to get caught here. Let me at least get you some food. It must be cold outside after the rain," Max said. "That's all right, and don't come in today. I'm going into town. I need to go to the orphanage. I've got some boots and things there. I'll be back there in the evening." It's a half-day's walk, so come back tomorrow if you get caught." Sleep was relieved. Max sat down on the bed and frowned. He was so attached to Alex that he was afraid of losing him. "Don't worry, it's not my first time. No one there gives a damn about us. Take my boots. I have plenty of them." "No, I don't need to. The guys will tell me if my mom was looking for me. I have to ask, what if she came? The teacher would definitely say, ask the kids if they know anything about me. I have to see my own, but I'll be back. Don't be afraid for me." Alex smiled and climbed out the window. Max closed it and nestled into the room. It was cooler at once. He shook his head at the shower was not good. It was the first day he would spend without his best friend. Max stayed in his room all day. The next morning, as soon as his father left and the babysitter opened the book, he raced into the woods. Except Alex wasn't in the treehouse. There were some of his things in an old torn bag, a couple of pictures, some notebooks with drawings, pebbles with smooth edges that he was collecting for some reason. He looked for it everywhere and in the branches he used to live in. Dushan whimpered as he worried about his friend. What had become of him? Max was so worried that he couldn't go home. He sat there and didn't touch everything because he was afraid that once he left, Alex would come and not see him. Suddenly, he would think Max hadn't come at all. He would be offended and leave forever. Children's bottomless fears fill a child's entire world, pushing everything out of him, including common sense. When it was already dark outside, Max started looking. He had forgotten that there was a babysitter, that there was a father. All he thought about was Alex, about being with him as he was. When it became quite dark and his stomach began to growl with hunger, Max heard footsteps. He looked out of the cabin and saw his father. He wasn't swearing or yelling. Robert climbed up on a branch and looked into the house. "Well, what are you doing here?" he asked. "I'm waiting for a friend," Max admitted honestly. Now that Alex probably needed help, he had to do the mature thing, which was to ask for help. Max suddenly cried, either from nerves, or from fear, or from hunger. All day he sat with a bunch of sandwiches in a bag he had brought for Alex, but he dared not touch them. He neither drank nor ate, but just sat and looked around, waiting for Alex to show up. After all, he was supposed to be back yesterday. "Well, come on. Come here." Robert pulled his son out of the cabin, went down with him to the ground, and walked towards the house. The boy roared and put his arms around his father's neck and his legs around his waist. At home, Robert told her to make some sweet tea for Max. She was frightened that the child was nowhere to be found. In the evening, she called Robert herself. She was guilty and understood that. So she didn't leave. She waited for Robert to let her go. Being a babysitter for Max was a gold mine. Sitting around, reading books, getting a second pension. Over the years, Wendy Green has renovated the house, helped her son buy a car, and given her grandson a tablet. Max, after drinking the sweet drink, felt better and told his father all the stories and how he hid Alex and how they built the cabin. "I was amazed at how much he didn't know about his own son. And how could you not know that he spends half the day in the woods?" Robert lamented. He didn't venture out there himself. There were snakes and stuff. He used to play in the yard. "I'd go out and look around. Sometimes I'd walk around," Wendy Green lied defiantly. "How was I supposed to know he was running in the woods?" "Okay, but how could you not have noticed that boy was sleeping in our house?" Max decided to stand up for the babysitter. "You didn't know either. And Wendy Green goes home at night. She couldn't have seen him. Could you if you came over more often than once a day?" Robert drenched everything in paint. He thought that if Emily could see him now from heaven, she would surely side with their son. "Please forgive me, Wendy Green. Forgive me. It was my fault in the heat of the moment. You're not a girl running after him in the woods. You did the right thing. I'm so grateful. Did you know you're taking tomorrow off with pay? Take a break from us. Come back the day after tomorrow. I'll take tomorrow off from work, and we'll go look for your orphan boy. We'll get acquainted. We'll ask him who he is. Maybe we can do something to help him. Yeah, let's go see him. Max calmed down a little. Wendy Green was delighted and galloped home. The story ended very well for her. Max, on the other hand, stayed up most of the night. Sleep didn't come to him until morning. Robert looked into his room and decided not to wake him. He went to the same cabin. Took this Alex's things. The sandwiches that Max had left him were lying untouched. Robert took them and gave them to the stray dogs on the way. Robert came home, looked in the bag. In addition to the children's drawings, confirming that Alex was real and not imaginary, there were pictures. The pictures were of the same woman, and Robert almost lost his balance as he peered into the pictures. A mug had just fallen out of his hands from the emergency coffee and shattered on his feet, but it was boiling hot. Robert looked again more closely. There could be no mistake. It was definitely Jenna. The same Jenna who had taken Max out for him. But what could that mean? Maybe she was sending this boy to take Max to her. Maybe she wants to get to know him better. Who knows what this woman wants? Robert tensed his heart without coffee, pounding in a frantic rhythm. At that moment, a sleepy Max came down the stairs. Robert smiled. Wait there. I broke a mug with some splinters. I'll clean it up, and then we'll go to the city shelter for breakfast. Over breakfast. The son was in high spirits. He believed he would find his best friend today. How do you know which orphanage he's in? Asked the boy at the stove with the sandwiches. There's only one in town as far as I know. But if there are two, we'll go to both. Gotta get your friend's stuff back, right? Robert was tense. He felt threatened by the photo he saw. There are no such things as coincidences. It's not a movie. Dad, can you adopt him? Max asked. Robert looked at him seriously. You would like it very much. I won't ask you for anything else for the rest of my life, if you do. I swear. He's in there. You know how bad it is. It's terrible. He's a good guy, humble, shy, a little caring. He's kind. And the kids at the orphanage are mean. So he runs away and lives on the street until it gets cold. Let's find him and meet him. I'm not saying no to you, but it's not an easy decision. I need time to think about it, and I need to know everything about the boy. Not to rush things. We won't leak him anyway. If you two are so good friends, I promise. Max felt a little better. Soon they were in the car and driving into town. It was about 6 miles down the highway. It was a small town. Max found the address of a shelter on his phone, and an hour later they were on his doorstep. We're looking for a boy. He owns these things. He runs away a lot, and my son has become friends with him. He really wants to see him. He's worried about him. The caretaker frowned. We don't have a boy like that. And no one runs away. Strictly, she said. Max was afraid that he wouldn't find a friend, that this woman was lying to hide Alex from him. Maybe they were seriously punishing him. Then I'll go to the police. I have to find out who this boy is. Here are his things. He held out the bag to the caretaker. When she heard about the police, she sighed. There is no boy. I told you, but there's a girl. This is her stuff. She came back the day before yesterday. Barely caught her. Come with me. The girl that Max was perplexed by. They were made to take off their shoes at the threshold and were led down a shabby corridor into a room with only a table and 2 chairs on either side of it. Soon the caregiver led Alex there. Hi, I was so worried. Max hugged his friend, but then pulled away. What are you, a girl? Well, to be honest, yes, guiltily, she smiled. Only now Max saw that she had perfectly female features, only a boy's haircut. But for some reason she did not say it once. He wondered, with me, boys do not want to be friends. But if you introduce yourself to boys, they want to. And adults are more willing to help a boy, while a girl is dragged straight to the police station. I lie and ask for money for the train, and they give it to me. And when I had long hair, they kept dragging me back to the shelter. So I cut it off myself with scissors. The nurse had to cut my hair like a boy. Max smiled. Is that why you asked me not to look while I was changing my bathing suit? If you had told me right away, I would have made friends with you anyway. You're cool." They chatted and couldn't tear themselves away from each other. Robert went out to the teacher to ask her about Alex. She came to us almost 3 years ago. Her mother was deprived of her parental rights. She was either an alcoholic or a lady of easy virtue. God knows what she did for a living. But the social services won't harm the child. If she was deprived of it, then she deserved it. Like everyone else at first, she went around the house. I allowed meetings. I'm not some kind of monster. She went almost every day. And then I told her straight out, "It's worse for the girls. Her soul is torn. Let her get used to living here." Of course, she didn't listen to me. She kept walking, and then all of a sudden she disappeared. Alex was waiting for her very much, and the guys started teasing her, saying that her mother had abandoned her or died. And it's been a long time since she's come here once. She doesn't even come from behind the fence to look at her daughter, as she used to. We can all see that. Maybe she's really dead. She's drunk. Or maybe she was locked up. Who knows? Robert listened to the educator's story and pursed his lips. That didn't sound like Jenna. He didn't say he knew her personally. "Do you mind if my Max stays with Alex some more? They've become very good friends. I'm probably going to ask for adoption. I don't want to keep them apart, and I need to get away on business." Robert wasn't sure if the caregiver would approve, so he handed her $100. "Let her stay," she nodded, hastily shoving the money in her pocket. Now he was sure there would be no problem. He got in his car and made a few calls. His employee was the wife of a policeman. And not just any cop, but some head of the local Department of Internal Affairs. He asked her for help, and in 15 minutes he had all the information about Jenna. He arrived at the address he was given. The apartment was in a shoddy apartment building on the 7th floor. The elevator didn't work. Robert climbed upstairs and rang the doorbell. Jenna opened it for him. She hadn't changed at all in those 8 years. Of course, she recognized him. "You." She wasn't so much surprised as frightened. Robert smiled at her, but Jenna even took a step back, covering her breasts with her hand. "Good afternoon, Jenna. I didn't mean to scare you. I will explain everything to you." She nodded and stepped aside, inviting her guest into the house. The inside was perfect, clean. There was not a hint of immorality or drunkenness. Maybe she was coded. "Why are you here?" "Not very friendly," she began. Robert sat back in his chair and clasped his fingers together. He told her about the boy who turned out to be a girl, her daughter. "Yes, that's my daughter." "And what do you want?" she asked. Robert couldn't understand why she was frightened and why she was so rude to him. He paid her back like he was supposed to. Maybe she suffered a serious psychological trauma giving up her child. That's why she gave birth to the second one. Right after Max was born. "You see, I saw your picture, and I thought I'd find you. I can help you. I have some connections. Tell me, why were you disbarred?" "My son is very attached to your daughter. He even asked me to take her out of the orphanage, to adopt her." Jenna jumped to her feet. "Don't you dare. That's my daughter. You've already taken one child from me. Yes, it was yours, but I carried it. And you don't know what that is. And you will never understand me. Don't you dare take her." Robert got to his feet, holding out his palm to Jenna. All right. There's no need to be nervous. I'm here to help. I got it all figured out. I'll give it back to you. I just want to help. You have a wonderful daughter. You gave me a son, and no amount of money can ever repay me for what you did. I'll owe you my whole life, and I'll try to repay you as much as I can. Jenna, tell me what happened." He spoke very convincingly, and she calmed down a little. Jenna sat down on the edge of the sofa and gestured for her guest to sit down. "If you found my address, you must have seen what's written on my file. But it's a lie. They said my apartment was supposedly almost a brothel. They found witnesses too. Neighbors confirmed all just that lie. They were bribed. They weren't even from my driveway. They went to my real neighbors, but everybody turned them down. No one wanted to slander me. Everybody knew that I was just an ordinary store clerk and a good mother. We had the most ordinary family. Robert frowned. Jenna, who are they? Their last name is Simmons. He works as an operative. She opened her own beauty salon. There's a lot you don't know about me. I went into surrogacy because it was the only way for me to find money fast. When I was carrying your baby, my mother was seriously ill. She had a routine ulcer surgery, but it was done very badly. She kept getting worse and worse. Then they found a tumor there. It had to be treated, and it was urgent. I had two options to go to escort or surrogacy. I applied to all sorts of foundations, but they refused me. Somewhere they put me on a waiting list. People were more willing to help children. And my mom was in her 40s. I had to do something. I had to find money. I turned to the bank, but my salary was not enough to approve the necessary amount of money. Then I saw your ad, just came across it in that newspaper and decided that I would call. My mother was already sick and wouldn't get out of bed. You promised me maintenance before the birth and a good sum after. That covered all our expenses, enough to pay for expensive treatment. I wouldn't go into debt. I couldn't refuse. You didn't know. I didn't tell you, but I had a fiancé. He was the son of teachers, a decent man of the old ways. We didn't sleep with him. We were saving ourselves for each other. We decided to wait until we were married, and then to be the first. When I told him I had found a solution and voiced it, he was against it, told me to say no, that we will find another way out. But he didn't offer me anything. My mother's life depended on it, and he was strictly forbidden to go for it. I had no choice but to return the ring and break off the engagement. I lied to my mom, told her he hadn't cheated. Otherwise, she wouldn't have let me do it. When I went to the doctor for a checkup, she was shocked. A virgin wants to be a surrogate. I asked her not to tell anyone. She cried and told me about her fiancé and about my mom's disease. I had nobody else but her, not a single soul in the world. Do you understand? Robert nodded. He was in shock too. He didn't know the half of it. He thought he wanted to buy a house or start his own business. Whatever he thought, he didn't know the truth. I had a baby. I did everything I had to do for you. And my mother and I went to Boston for the surgery. It was successful, but the tumor came back. This time it was malignant and quickly metastasized. A second surgery was needed. I contacted a couple who also wanted to have a child. They had also placed an ad. I called them and told them that I was already a surrogate and they were ready to do it again. But I need half the amount right away, otherwise I don't agree. The Simmons turned out not to be like you. They paid me part of the money. We did the procedure, and that was it. They didn't call. They weren't interested in me. So I took care of my mother. I must have been very nervous about the surgery, and I had a miscarriage. I was already 4 months pregnant. Then my mother's surgery took a long time to prepare. She was undergoing chemotherapy. When the surgery was done, the doctor came out of the room and told me she had died. She hadn't survived the intervention. He said it was even better. The tumor had metastasized a lot. If she hadn't passed away like that during the surgery, she would have died very painfully. I buried my mother, and after that I had a miscarriage. The Simmons came to me at the hospital and told me that I should not have dealt with the mother, but should have thought only of their child. They demanded the full amount and moral compensation. I checked out, went to the bank, and got approved. Paid them both what they gave me and exactly what they paid for the embryo lift. The loan was approved for the long term. I was willing to pay it off little by little. I had a job. Except they demanded the same amount more. On what basis? Robert wondered. They said I had killed their child. The situation was complicated. I lost the baby at a long term. They had already set up the nursery. They told everyone that they were going to have a baby. They were upset, and it was like they were mad. I told them everything as it was, but they didn't care about my problems. They blamed it on me. Eventually, they sued me and lost. The judge said that the miscarriage was the result of psychological trauma, of nervous shock. There was no malice on my part. I followed all the doctor's recommendations. I took vitamins. I didn't lift weights. I was just supporting my mom. She wasn't a bed patient. She took care of herself, but she didn't go to work. I didn't hurt the baby in any way. But what happened was what happened. The judge said that the amount of money I gave Simmons back right away, too, they had to give me back. Our contract originally stated that they were paying half the money up front, and it was not refundable. They went to court themselves and put that contract in the judge's hands themselves. I did not ask for anything. I gave them the money against receipt, transferred it to their account, and it was traceable. Maria Simmons was furious. Not only did they lose the trial, but they were also in deep trouble. After that, they had to give me all the money back, and I went back to the bank. Then her husband James got sneaky. He's an operative, and it cost him nothing to get me disbarred. He bribed the neighbors, put some criminals up to it, and I was charged with trafficking myself from a store clerk to an escort. I didn't understand why he was doing it. You only get fined for that. I was issued a fine. I paid it, but it turned out that he was digging deeper than I saw. After the fine came to me, the child welfare authorities, and said that their child was being taken away from me. The neighbors bribed Simmons wrote an official complaint. It was such that it made the hairs on my head go crazy. It turned out that I was not feeding my daughter, that she was always walking around, dirty, begging for food. They said that she slept over many times because I bring men to the house and we make a lot of noise at night. Alex denied everything, but who would listen to a 6-year-old child? The kindergarten teachers could not testify. Other neighbors stood up for me too, but I was deprived of my rights anyway. After my daughter was taken away from me, Maria Simmons came up to me. She was at my hearing too. That's the way you do it. You took our baby from us, and we took yours from you. You know what it's like to feel it now, don't you? She said then. I figured they were more hurt about the money than they were about the baby. I don't know. I guess it was both. I wanted to end it all that day, but I decided I would still be with my daughter. I went to see her all the time. The caregivers said it was harder for her to adjust. I went to court, and again I asked for custody rights back, but it was denied, and that's when I dropped my hands. I did what the caregivers told me to do. I stopped coming and started working on restoring my reputation. Gathered a lot of testimonials from everyone I had contact with over the last few months. I'm getting tests, so there are certificates that I don't drink or use illegal drugs. I'll get it back. Robert shook his head. Your daughter built a treehouse and lived in it. Jenna cried. That's my little girl. She always dreamed of having a treehouse, like in one of the fairy tales. What did you raid to her? I'll help you. I don't think the court will give you back custody. James probably bribed someone in the court. Otherwise, you wouldn't have been disbarred. It's a last resort. There's got to be something wrong there. If he bribed his neighbors, he could have bribed the judge too. Robert said goodbye to Jenna, left her his phone number, and went to pick up his son. When he arrived at the orphanage, Max Alex sat by the window and talked about something. There are no such friends here. She doesn't get along with anyone, the educator told him. You should really take custody of yourself, and your Max would be good for her and for us. What's the harm? She's a devil in a skirt. She cut her own braids. Can you imagine? Everyone was shocked. And she didn't give a damn. She's a good girl, capable and highly intelligent. But she doesn't like it here. And she's always going against the system. She's fighting against everyone here. Stupid girl doesn't understand that we don't keep her here. She lets out her barbs and doesn't let anyone near her. She has no friends and no girlfriends. Psychologists all agree that she's perfectly normal, and her behavior is a reaction to the situation. But she doesn't trust anybody, not even a psychologist. She closes up, withdraws into herself, and doesn't listen to anybody, doesn't talk to anybody, and constantly gets into fights, stands up for the weak. The children here have their own rules, and she doesn't like them. If you don't take her away, I will recommend her to all the parents who come to take her away as soon as possible. Otherwise, we will be punished for her constant escapes, and we will be fired, and the name will not be asked. Robert sighed. I'll take her, I promise. And she's a good mother. Believe me, she's decent. I've known her for years. It's just that she was separated from the baby on purpose, Robert said. Maybe you were her father. Then you would have no problem giving her away, wouldn't you? Asked the carer suspiciously. No, unfortunately. I'm not her father, but she has a wonderful mother. We'll get her out of here soon. I'll do anything for that, Robert said. He and Max left, and Alex stayed by the window until just before lights out. She heard what Robert said, and there was hope in her soul. Robert took a few more days off from work. It wasn't hard for the boss to do that. He stopped by there, gave an errand, and left. An hour later, I was standing outside a small private house. Inside, he could hear a baby crying. He rang the bell, and a man came out to him. "What can I do for you?" he asked gruffly. Robert held out his hand and introduced himself. "I am in charge of the Jenna Orton matter. You were instrumental in having her daughter taken from her. How can we resolve this issue?" Robert asked. The man looked around and closed the door behind him. "Where do you think you're going?" he asked with a scowl. Robert was not afraid. He wanted to make things work out peacefully. "Look, I know all about it, and I know about the man you bribed. I'll outbid you. Your witnesses will confess in court. They'll turn you in, and you'll go to jail. Maybe you'll lose your epaulets too." That was Robert. He knew all he had to do was find the pressure points. "What are you talking about? Who the hell are you?" No fool would testify against himself. They were the ones giving false evidence. "Not me," smiled the cheeky operative. "And they'll say that they were under pressure, that you didn't pay them, but intimidated them, and they won't be threatened. Plus I pay them, and you go to jail." "Look, James, I don't want all that. I just want the baby to go back to his mother. You did a terrible thing. It wasn't her daughter's fault. And it's not Jenna's fault she lost your baby either. She was a girl, went into surrogacy to save her mother's life. Do you have a mother or a conscience or anything human? Or do they take away your entire moral code when you're admitted? What are you really doing? You want money. I'll pay you back. Just to Jenna Moore." The man didn't listen. He punched Robert in the face. Then he hit him again and again. With the first punch, he broke Robert's nose, and he could no longer respond. He just closed in, gasping in pain, while James kept pounding him hard, kicking and punching him. When his rage was over, he walked over to the downed Robert and looked him in the eye. "She killed my baby. The doctors said it was a boy. You have a child, don't you? Leave it alone." "Just got it, Robert." James turned around, hearing behind him an infant crying coming from the house. It was this sister who came with her children, and God didn't give us children. After this, Jenna, my wife, had another operation, and now we will never have a baby again. She took away our last chance. We paid her, and she was obligated to carry our baby. We buried our unborn son. He has his own grave. Did you know that? We go there every year, except there's only one date on it, the date of death. He was never born. Because of that creature, who cared more about her problems than her mother, you couldn't bring back her worries, but you could kill our child with them. It was her fault. The bitch. Why should she have a child, and we shouldn't? Her mother died. Mom, don't you understand? It wasn't her fault. She shouldn't have been sedated. It could have hurt your baby. How could she not care about the death of her only family member? She had no one. If you had taken an interest in her, if you had helped her at least with the funeral, maybe she wouldn't have lost your baby. But you only called her once a month, and you weren't interested in her problems. It's your own fault. You should have been more humane. Robert got to his feet, but James knocked him to the ground again with one punch. "I don't want to see you around here again. And if your Jenna tries to go to court again, I'll make sure they find a kilo of illegal drugs on her, and she goes to jail for the rest of her life. And you and that bitch are going to jail. Hey, bro. See ya." James left, slamming the door, and Robert realized that he had to go to the hospital. He got to his feet, but he threw up. His head was spinning too much. He walked to the nearest bus stop and called an ambulance. An hour later, Jenna walked into the room where Robert was lying. "How did this happen? Did he do it?" she asked. Jenna was agitated. "It's okay. I thought I'd solve everything through simple communication. But there's nothing human left in that James. His wife is in some kind of trouble, and now even ECO can't help them. They blame you and my mother for everything. James beat me up. One day they say he killed his wife, too. That's why she's got girl trouble. She told me herself, not all of it. It was his fault. But he looks for blame everywhere." Robert sighed. "Jenna, you can stay at my house tonight with Max. I'll give him a heads up and call the babysitter. I'd sign the paperwork myself and leave the hospital, but I can't even move my head. I have a concussion. Didn't the cameras see you get hit? Maybe we can use the footage on the camera, but he's a cop. He'll get away with it. We're gonna need a different kind of dirt, a sharper one. Get a doctor's note saying you got beaten up. File a report against him. It'll help when you find the rest. I'll stay with Max, of course. Thank you, and I'm sorry. You almost got yourself killed because of me." Jenna leaned over and lightly touched his cheek with her lips. Robert got an electric shock. He wasn't expecting it. He looked into her eyes and smiled. He gave her his address, and she left, calling all ready from its house when she got there. Jenna let the babysitter go, feeding Max. He kept asking her about Alex. All they talked about was her. Jenna listened with rapt attention as Max talked about their adventures, everything his daughter told him. He treasured her and missed her. Jenna missed him even more and could barely contain herself from crying. Robert was in the hospital for 4 days. During that time, Jenna helped Wendy Green look after Max. Both the nanny and the boy liked her. And when Robert returned, he felt like he was in a real family. It was like Jenna had always been here. While I was in the hospital, I wasted no time. Hired a private investigator who dug up enough dirt on James to put him away for a long time. Are you ready for this? Jenna nodded. Robert laid the papers on the table in front of her. There were facts of beatings and witness intimidation. There was so much information. Him stealing, beating men, and threatening women. Wasn't that enough? Unfortunately, the information was circumstantial, and not every witness is willing to testify. We have to be sure. And I'll start with the people who confronted you. I have all their information. Robert spent the day with his son, and the next day, he went straight to Jenna's witness. It was an elderly couple. I want to get justice. Help me out. If he paid, I'll give you more. You say he intimidated you, and you won't get anything. And the little girl will go back to her mother. The old woman lowered her eyes. He didn't pay, but he helped my son get his sentence reduced. He got out early. I don't want him to go to jail again. I won't testify, she said. Go away, kid. We're no help to you. You know, we've got a kid too. Robert nodded and walked out. What they didn't know was that the whole thing was recorded on a hidden camera, which he borrowed from the private detective who was helping him on the case. The same day, the detective pulled up his son's case, that is, the family's, and found out that the parole in his case had been trumped up. The paperwork had been prepared in some way. That's exactly the kind of thing you could pick on. But Robert needed someone else to go up against the Simmons. He found the guy James had brutally beaten. The tape was deleted in no uncertain terms where the detective had dug up. She managed to find out his name, and that is how she got in touch with him. Robert came to his house, introduced himself, and explained why. What had you done to him? Why did he do this to you? Robert asked, turning on the tape. I was his wife's lover. She is afraid of him. That's why she doesn't leave. And he beat the shit out of me. So I barely survived. I'll have to spend the rest of my life in therapy. Stay away from him. A guy like that James could kill you. I don't doubt that. He's got a steady hand. Why didn't you go to court? He said he'd kill me and her. His wife isn't like him. Sure, Maria's not much of a character, but she's a good person. Robert just shook his head. This young guy also refused to testify. Jenna left his house as soon as Robert returned. He offered to let her stay, but she refused. She had her own life, a job close to home. He was terribly tempted to take her out to the movies tonight, to talk, to spend time with her. She was a good-looking girl, and Robert had a deep sympathy for her. He even began to dream about her. It must have been a crush, something he hadn't felt in years since his wife died. The next day, Robert left the house, waved to his babysitter and son, who were seeing him off at the doorstep, and pressed the gas pedal. He reached a curve and saw a huge black SUV blocking his path. Whatever happens, he said to himself, got out of the car and turned on the camera. Just in case, the broadcast was immediately leaked to the network. The detective had access to the video. Robert understood that even if he was about to be attacked, it would help the case. This to his surprise, there was no limit. Maria Simmons got out of the car. She was a long-haired blonde, very beautiful, even too beautiful. The woman walked up to him and put her hands in her trouser pockets. "Do you know who I am? And I know that you are digging for my husband," she said. Robert sighed. "All I want is for the little girl to go back to her mother. You contributed to her having such a serious childhood trauma. How do you sleep at night?" "Fine." And the little girl cries and wants to go home. "Are you here to tell me that your husband is going to crush me, roll me in the asphalt? Don't do that. I'm not scared. I know I'm doing a good thing. It's worth any price I have to pay. Jenna will get her daughter back. You'll see. And neither you nor your husband will get in my way." Maria lowered her head, and when she raised it again, tears spurted from her eyes. "I was angry with Jenna, but I cooled down. I came to my senses and asked James to back off. He was determined. He turned me against Jenna, told me she'd gotten rid of the baby on purpose. I only found out later that this was a lie. He let it slip. I asked him why he did it. I couldn't understand such cruelty. I found out the truth. Turns out our surrogate mother was treating her mother, and she died. And James and I made sure that we took her daughter away from her too. I was just horrified. No one knows. But it was James who got me into trouble. He infected me when we were teenagers. We'd been together since high school. I got sick and had to have surgery for it. One another, a third. The only hope I had was for Echo. After Jenna miscarried, James beat me drunk and beat me half to death. Then the internal bleeding started, and I had already had everything removed completely. There's no way I can have children now. Jesus, how do you live with him? And why? Or is he blackmailing you too?" Robert was horrified. "He says he loves me. He really does. He would die for me. I know he would. It's just the way he is. We've been together for years, and I'm behind him like a stone wall. He's reliable, just not balanced. It's nerves. He's actually a wonderful person. Plus his job deforms his personality. Every day he sees dead bodies on the job, hangs out with murderers, thieves. What do you think that must have made him?" Robert shook his head. "No matter what. He broke your life. Did you want to leave him?" "I don't want to leave him." "You're right. Of course you can't. That's why I'm here. The man I love called me and said you were looking for Dervon James. I brought it for you here. Enough to put him away. And I'll testify in court. Tired of being afraid of him. Tired of being with him." The beautiful blonde handed Robert a folder of documents. As he opened the first page, he realized there was enough information to give her husband a few life sentences. He began leafing through, and the hairs on his head moved. This man had killed, tortured, abused. He was a real monster, a maniac. Robert slowly raised his eyes to Maria. "He won't kill you for that. I'm the only one he won't kill. Otherwise, he wouldn't want to live himself. But if he chooses to kill, better death than living with this man under the same roof. Robert thanked her, and Maria climbed into her huge car and drove off. Robert, on the other hand, took the documents directly to the police internal security service, making copies of the photos beforehand. After writing a statement and handing over everything he had, he took the originals to the prosecutor's office. Then the detective helped him get the newspapermen involved. They leaked some of the information that the investigator allowed. They weren't all tied up. After all, James was a simple operative. His connections weren't enough to get away with it this time. Robert went home, packed up Max, and took him and Jenna to his old friend's house. I'm afraid James is going to retaliate. Do you need to sit this one out? You wouldn't leave either, just in case he asks someone to kill you, give you an assignment. All his comrades said. They were in a small apartment across town. Robert left his car at the gate and took a cab to cover his tracks. He really feared for his life and for the lives of Max and Jenna. They stayed there until evening. It was about 7 o'clock when Robert turned on the news. A police officer had been shot today while apprehending a particularly dangerous criminal in the downtown area. It was learned that the suspect worked as an operative in the local department. He opened fire and wounded an officer. The shooting ended fatally. The suspect was wounded and died before the ambulance arrived. Let me remind you that he is accused of 3 murders. Multiple counts of extortion, witness intimidation, and battery were found. The investigation will continue until full clarity is given. Robert and Jenna looked at each other. Max was playing somewhere in the kitchen. Robert's friend, who was also in the apartment and had heard everything, sighed and went out. A minute later, he was back in the room with a bottle of champagne. It didn't seem right. Still, the man is dead, Robert said with a judgmental look. Open up. Jenna came out. I've been without a daughter for 3 years now. At his mercy, they drank and took a cab home. She became with Robert Max that day. In the evening, when the boy was already asleep, they met in the kitchen in the semi-darkness. Jenna came in for a drink of water. Robert couldn't sleep. I wanted to offer you something. Stay with us and let's go out. I think I'm in love with you. No, I'm definitely in love with you. Robert moved closer to her and tried to kiss her, but Jenna stopped him. There's something else you should know. I'm a liar. If you forgive me, I will stay with you because our feelings are mutual. But I'm sorry to you. The thing is, I had 2 babies that day. I had 2. I knew that, and I dragged it away. When I got pregnant, I realized I just couldn't give the baby away. And when it turned out there were going to be 2, I made up my mind right away.